Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to BNNOMS. I'm your host, Tracy Cooper, and this is Super Tuesday. Here with me today is Mr. John Dusenberry, and he's one of the Ohio Media School instructors. Hey, John, welcome to the show.
How are you doing, Tracy?
How are you doing? Glad to have you here.
I'm super excited today because today is one of my favorite days of the year, or of the election cycle. It's Super Tuesday.
All right, so that's the breakthrough of my question. What is Super Tuesday?
So Super Tuesday is this big event that happens actually every 4 years. Both the Republican and Democratic Party has a day where they decide who their candidate is going to be for President of the United States. Now, there are other Super Tuesdays that happen for other candidates, but these are the two primary larger parties.
Okay.
And because we are in the middle of the current president, Donald J. Trump, is seeking re-election. The big one right now for a lot of people in the news is that the Democratic candidate, who is going to be the candidate that's going to be running against Donald J. Trump. And today it's big because we have so many different types of people that are going to be voting. There are votes that are happening in the state of Maine, which is in the far northeast, all the way out to the west, which is in California. You also have Utah, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Minnesota, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, and North Carolina. They're all voting today. And those votes represent a large majority of what is known as delegates. Okay. And to be able to say, this is the person that we are going to make our nomination eventually at the big nomination party that happens later this year. Right. And so we're very soon, it is now 7:21 Eastern Standard Time, very soon we're going to start getting results from Maine, from Virginia, from Alabama, also North Carolina, and that's really important. We also have Democrats that are doing abroad. So abroad means that that's people that are in the military service. Their voting is happening right now from December 3rd to December the 10th, and there's also America Samoa, which is a territory of the United States of America. Okay. So those are all places that currently are voting today to see who's going to be the president of the United States.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about delegates. What do we mean by delegates?
So delegates. So essentially what ends up happening is delegates are a way for a state. So the way that it works, let's back up just a second. A great question about delegates. Let's back up just for a second. Right now we have those 14 states. Now the Democratic Party decides when those states are going to happen based on a number of things, and the states themselves decide. So a few years ago, for example, in 2016, the state of California didn't have their primary until July. Okay. They decided to move it up to Super Tuesday. Now, part of the reason why they moved it up only to Super Tuesday and not into February is that there is a rule that exists that there are 4 states that will do their primaries prior to the first Tuesday in March. Okay. And then all of the other 46 states become eligible on the first Tuesday of March. So the first 4 states are Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and then South Carolina. And those 4 states are supposed to have a kind of a representation of what people think or feel those candidates will be strong in. So for example, Bernie Sanders and Buttigieg both won in Iowa. Then you went to New Hampshire where Sanders won, Nevada where Sanders won, and now we're seeing a surging Joe Biden who won in South Carolina. Okay. So because those 4 happen now we get to Super Tuesday, which is the first time any of the other states can vote. And these also give like a broad spectrum of who the Democrats feel will actually be able to win the overall president or the overall candidacy to be president of the United States, potentially running against President Bill Clinton. Okay. So great question about the delegates, but that explains why they're actually where they're at right now. We'll also have other states that will go as late as May, June. These are states that will continue on. Okay. What we may see eventually, because of the way that the convention is happening right now, we actually may see what's called a broker convention later today.
Now, what's that?
A broker convention is this. So you have to have X amount of votes, and those votes come from delegates. Now, when you go to a poll, or when you go to elect today, what you're essentially doing is like, because we live in a republic, is you're essentially saying, this is my vote and this is what I want the delegate to vote for.
Okay.
Okay. And the delegate then is their responsibility to go and vote the way that you want them to vote, right?
All right.
So they go and they say, okay, all of these people in this specific area said they want Bernie Sanders, so I'm going to vote for Bernie Sanders because he was the person we wanted to vote for. Or they may say that they wanted to vote for Amy Klobuchar, even though she dropped out of the race. That's
Okay.
possible. You can do that. In fact, if enough people voted for Donald Duck, they could vote for Donald Duck.
Exactly.
That's supposed to be what the responsibility is. Now, the delegate at that convention, though, can change their mind.
Okay.
Then they have something what's called a super delegate.
Okay.
Now, you have to, as a person who's running and as a candidate, you have to earn so many of those delegates,
Okay.
and you do that by getting 1,991 of the delegates. That gives you the majority that you're supposed to need. If we get to the convention, and at that point in time at the convention, nobody's won the 1,991 votes, you get to what's called a super delegate.
Okay.
A super delegate is a group of people who are not decided by voters. They're actually decided by the party. And the party says super delegates are people who are generally like maybe the former President Barack Obama. He's not a super delegate, but maybe somebody who that party trust
Okay.
to be able to then vote to get to that 1,991. If we don't have 1991 by the time we get to the convention, we may end up in what's called a broker convention, where essentially they vote on the floor to decide who the candidate's going to be.
Okay. So, in your opinion, as it stands right now, who do you think looks like they're coming on top?
Well, okay, so right now, we'll talk a little bit about this.
Okay.
What's big and it's happening right now is that we saw in the last 24 to 48 hours, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on with one of the interviewers,
All right.
we saw Pete Buttigieg and we saw Amy Klobuchar. They ended up dropping out of the race, and they ended up backing up Joe Biden.
Okay.
In essence, what that says is that this kind of like very moderate Democrat base that is in the Democratic Party, they're supporting one another, and
All right.
there's a push. And then you have Bernie Sanders, who is more of a progressive liberal, called often a Democratic socialist, which he doesn't mind to be called.
All right.
And he is a little further left than the moderates, obviously.
Oh, okay.
And so right now, what we're seeing in this primary season, what's happening in this candidacy is we're seeing where the heart of the Democratic Party is going to end up being over what I believe to be the next 20 years. We're going to see either Bernie Sanders end up saying, or the Democratic Party be going progressive liberal, or we are going to see them stay with the moderate route with a Joe Biden, who is and has been a moderate for a very long time.
All right. Well, we thank you so much for listening to our segment. We'll be right back. We got to pay some bills.
state, you are not going to get any delegates. It's going to be a zero. However, if within a state you get more than 15% of the state's votes, you will actually get a number of delegates that you can take with you when you go to the big convention that will be happening later this year. And that means, which is important because let's say that you're, for example, Bernie Sanders, right? And you just won Vermont. Now, there are other states, maybe a little bit further south, where you aren't going to, maybe you're not doing it quite as well, like a Tennessee or a South Carolina, right? But you still get above that 15% threshold, you're still going to take a certain number of those delegate votes from that state and apply it to the 1,991 votes that you need to capture the big majority that the Democrats are looking for when they go out to vote. Because you need that 1,991 delegates to be the clear winner of the Democratic Party, the Democratic nomination.
Right, so it's good to get some votes just so you can get some of these delegates.
Yeah.
Because other than like Vermont, very small amount of delegates.
Right.
So you want to get those votes in the big states like Texas,
California. Right, absolutely. Absolutely correct.
So speaking of California has 415 delegates.
Right.
Nearly 2/3 of those delegates vote by mail.
Yes.
And they're going to be accepting these mail-in ballots, if you will, up until Friday.
Right.
So what kind of impact could that have?
Well, it depends.
Tonight?
Well, it depends, right? So, like, let's say, for example, you haven't quite done that vote yet. You haven't quite sent in your vote, and all of a sudden, Biden jumps out into a big lead. Maybe that affects your vote, and you say, well, okay, Biden's going to be the clear winner. Whereas prior to that, maybe you were voting for Bernie Sanders. So that's a big part of that. So California has a very different system because they feel as if the voters should have more opportunity and a longer time to be able to do a lot of their voting. So they have a longer period of time. So that could potentially affect the way that California ends up voting. And that's a very important thing because we had talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Usually, previously they were in July. Now they've moved their votes all the way up until the first week of March, the first available time. So that could be a huge thing. Going back to the thing about delegates too, what's really super important about this is we've noticed that Mike Bloomberg did not run in the first 4 races. He wasn't in New Hampshire, he was not in Vermont, he was not in Nevada, and he was not in South Carolina. So part of his strategy right now is to get some of those votes on Super Tuesday, to get the 15%, try to get 15% in each state, to get some delegates and start making that overall push to get the overall nomination, which is going to be an interesting strategy. He came late into the game, and as he came in, he started spending money right away.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Let's talk about that money because he spent over $500 million on television ads, mostly in these Super Tuesday states.
Right.
Are you worried that this could make super wealthy people who do have some political experience maybe try to buy, quote unquote, buy delegates because they're not necessarily buying them with just TV ads and advertising in general?
I would like to say no, but I know that, wealth has always been an influence in politics since the inception of since the Declaration of Independence, since the very first time we ever elected a president of the United States. It's always been an effective way to get money. I mean, and especially with things like Citizens United, which was passed more than a decade ago. Wealth is definitely something that is going to play into this. And really, we had talked about a little bit earlier about the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. The heart and soul is two very different individuals right now. We saw the surging Biden that happened in South Carolina, and then we saw Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders has, for the most part, had a very grassroots effort. They will proudly publicize that their average donation to them is $21. That obviously Bernie is not a hyper billionaire that is using his own money to run. He's running on kind of like the people's movement kind of thing, if you really think about it. So those are some of the things you want to be thinking about as far as the question is, can Michael Bloomberg prove himself to be enough of a good candidate to be able to go in and try to buy the candidacy? Now, the thing about it is we've seen this happen before. In 1992, we saw Ross Perot run against much younger Bill Clinton and the stalwart George H.W. Bush. And at the time, he was really kind of pushing for attempting to become president. And he was using his billions of dollars as being the CEO of Texas Instruments.
Right. Didn't he get the most votes of a third-party candidate ever?
I believe it was, well, in the modern era, right? I mean, there's been other parties. I mean,
Oh,
Teddy Roosevelt ran as a member of the Moose Bear Party, I believe, at one
Right.
time. So, I mean, as far as like the two main parties, both the Democrat and Republicans, which are now there, yes, to answer your question, they absolutely, he was one of the top ones. So we've seen this before. The question is the Democratic Party going to allow itself to be lulled into Michael Bloomberg being the leader of the free world? And we don't know that. Maybe Bloomberg is the right person for the job. You know?
Yeah.
Some people have said that he did a decent job in New York. Other people have said that he hasn't done a very good job. That the stop and frisk thing is going to be actually something that really hurts him in the general election with certain voters.
Absolutely, and he apologized for that multiple times during his debates.
Yeah.
But I don't know that everyone will forgive him. So Bernie Sanders is expected to do extremely well tonight.
Yes.
Do you think that there is a certain number or percentage of delegates that Biden or Warren, because they're about the two next, Bloomberg is not expected to do fantastic. Do you
No.
think there is a number that they have to hit that they'll contend with Bernie?
I think so. I think what they need to do, I think Biden needs to do strong in the South because that's where Biden's going to do strong at. Warren probably won't do that great in the South, so she needs to do well in the Northeast. She also needs to do well in the West. So California, Utah, some of those further west states, she needs to do well in. Biden's going to do really well because of the number of states that are in the South today. You're looking at Tennessee, you're looking at South Carolina, you're looking at Texas, you're looking at Oklahoma, you're looking at a lot of these states that are much in Arkansas. You're looking at these states that are much further south that could really play into Joe Biden getting a big push here going into the rest of the campaign.
Okay. So do you think out of the three main candidates, which is, I think, Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Elizabeth Warren,
Yeah.
possibly Bloomberg, do you think any of them have a real shot at contending with Donald Trump?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
I think here's the thing. As far as what concerns with Donald Trump, I think you're going to definitely have the ability to contend with him. I think you have a really strong base. I think it's going to be a great election year. I think that there's been some missteps on both sides. We'll see what happens, and I think for example, they've pointed out more than one occasion, that out of the 47 out of the 50 polls, Bernie Sanders beats Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Right? So they've pointed that out on several occasions. But that doesn't mean that just because he beats him right now, he's going to beat him in November, right? So those are the questions you have to ask yourself. And it also doesn't mean that those folks who have been polling below that, not being able to beat Trump won't do a fantastic job actually catching up to it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that are going to play. I think it's going to be a very exciting election cycle.
Oh, it definitely should be.
And I think that we're seeing really at least 4 good candidates right now come out of the Democratic Party. Now we'll see some fun things happen. The question is, who's going to be the Vice President of the United States? That's going to be important because Vice President could be really make or break the Democratic Party right now too.
Oh, absolutely. Do you think there's a possibility that whichever candidate does win, if they'll pick one of these runners up for their running mate?
I think right now, I think that Joe Biden, if he becomes the front runner, I think he goes into the convention with his vice president chosen. And I think one of the really strong candidates right now for him will be Kamala Harris. I think Kamala Harris is a strong vice presidential candidate, but we'll see. There was a lot of people that talked about there being strong candidates prior to Mike Pence being chosen by Donald Trump in 2016.
Right.
And Pence, of course, has to be, go into a vice presidential debate. So great talkers are going to be really make this happen or not happen. I'm going to be completely honest with you.
I think the vice president is going to be huge for Bernie Sanders, because much like Mike Pence, who Donald Trump chose him because he's conservative, more conservative than himself. So Bernie Sanders, more or less, will have to take a kind of a more conservative vice president because he does lean so far to the left.
Right. Maybe try to appeal to the base a little bit. Maybe a Pete Buttigieg. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe Kamala Harris, who is a more conservative politician than Bernie is. So we don't know yet. We don't know the answer to that question yet. But somehow we're going to figure that out here pretty soon.
Absolutely. So we'll have to see how everything goes tonight. There is a total of 1,357 delegates available. So hopefully, in my opinion, Bernie Sanders gets all of them. He can be the next Democratic nomination.
Well, we now know who you're voting for. That's awesome, Jerry.
Absolutely. Oh, we're going to go to a quick commercial break here, and hope you stay tuned in for our next segment.
Now, 725, we had Joe Biden winning Virginia, and Vermont, Bernie Sanders took off with that. So, reporting for Virginia, we had 29% reporting, 59 delegates for Biden, 52.8% of votes for Virginia for Biden. For Sanders, we had 59.9% reporting, 12 delegates, 22.7% of votes. How you doing tonight, Dusenberry?
I'm doing really well, Delasia. How are you doing?
I'm okay.
Oh, you're okay?
Yeah.
It's an exciting night. We're doing
It
Super
is.
Tuesday.
And what's exciting about Super Tuesday with these polls, I just want everybody to know that for Super Tuesday, it's 1,617 total delegates are up for grabs just on Super Tuesday. And you need 1991 delegates to win.
That's right. We need 1,991 delegates to win. You're absolutely correct about it. And it looks like we're having kind of a very exciting Super Tuesday. Joe Biden has now taken both Virginia and North Carolina, which is very important. We had kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. He was going to do very well in the South. And right now, the states that are voting on Super Tuesday are in a large majority the southern states. We also see that Bernie Sanders is doing well where we thought he was going to do well in, and that is he did well in his home state of Vermont. So he won those delegates, and then Biden won Virginia and Biden won North Carolina. Personally, I think what we're going to see for the rest of today, we're going to see Biden probably take a majority in Tennessee. We're going to see that happen in Alabama. Likely see that in Arkansas. Where we start seeing some interesting things happen is when we're going to start seeing later reporting. And later reporting we'll also see Minnesota. We're going to see Colorado, Utah, and California. And these are the states where Bernie can really start to shine. And I mean, to be honest, we're starting to get to the point now where we're counting out Elizabeth Warren in a lot of ways. I mean, coming into today, she had 8 delegates, whereas Joe Biden had 72 and Bernie Sanders had 63. These are some of the things that we really need to be thinking about as we're going into there. We're going to see a lot of really early leads being talked about for Joe Biden, whereas Bernie's going to start pulling it out later in the later days, especially with California, where he is very well liked, as well as New York and some of the other states. Although they are not coming out today, obviously. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the Bernie Sanders campaign.
Mm-hmm. What about Bloomberg? You have anything to say?
Bloomberg, here's the thing. We're not seeing a lot of strong results yet for completely for Bloomberg. If I'm going to go here, I'm looking at the live updates that are happening with the Washington Post right now. The Post is saying Biden is projected to win Virginia, Sanders is projected to win Vermont. There's not really a whole lot being said about New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, and also Elizabeth Warren is starting to fade a little bit. Not to mention, where's Tulsi Gabbard? She was kind of the last of the people that is still still in it, and she's really not doing a whole lot for herself. So I expect to see more than one of these candidates kind of drop off in the next day or two. After today, I wouldn't be surprised unless she has a really strong showing out in the far west to see Elizabeth Warren drop. Now the question becomes, where does she say, here are the votes, here's where we want them to go? That's a big question. Who is she going to support? Who's she going to endorse for candidacy? Does she go with the Democrat usual Joe Biden, or does she go with Bernie Sanders, who people are going to start saying conspiracy when it comes to that guy, because he was second in 2016 as well.
Mm-hmm. So with the natural disaster that's going on in Nashville, Tennessee, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think, first of all, thoughts and prayers to the families in Nashville, Tennessee. In fact, my own sister, my 4 nieces, my 2 nephews, and her partner all live not too far from Nashville in Murfreesboro. So genuine concern right down there with those folks. But good news, a federal judge has made it so that most of the polling places have to stay open till 8, and then there are 5 polling places, the most affected, have to stay open till 10. So there is voting happening there. And of course, that's an important part of a republic, is that we are making sure that voting is happening right in here, right now.
Okay, that's good. Anything else you may have to say about what's going on with the updated polls?
Well, I don't know. I think we got to keep going on. I mean, again, where so many of the delegates are happening. 34% of the total available are happening as of today. We'll look at we're going to get part of Texas. Earlier on, because Texas is so huge. The rest of Texas will be reporting by 9 p.m. and California will be reporting by 11 p.m. So, it's going to be a very interesting day overall. I mean, we'll really start to see those last-minute results in California. I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a two-dog race after this. I think it's going to come down to Sanders versus Biden. And again, as I pointed out earlier, this is really about the heart of the party. Where is the next 20 years going?
Right.
Do the boomers come out and vote, or the millennials, are they going to come out and vote?
Right.
Those are important parts of what we're seeing right now in this election. So I expect a lot of fun things to happen over the course of the next 24 hours. It's going to be cool. It's going to be a lot of fun. As a political junkie, as like I am.
Right. That you are. Well, I did hear a little bit of updated information on California and Texas, where combined the delegates were about 648, somewhere around in there, 648 delegates. So that was about 745.
Yeah. There's 648 delegates in those two states, and that's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. If Sanders comes out with a big majority out in California, he's going to sweep past Joe Biden. So that's a big thing, right? That's a huge thing. It's going to be interesting. And of course, Biden's winning in Virginia because Northern Virginia is located right next to Washington, D.C., right? Or Washington, D.C. is in Northern Virginia. And that's where a lot of folks who are going to be supportive of somebody like Biden, who has been in Washington, D.C. for 30 plus years now, that's where a lot of his people are going to start voting for him. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Northern Virginia's turnout right now for Joe Biden.
Okay. Is there any other states that you may have a concern about?
Actually, I kind of, if I look at the map, and I've got this great map up on my screen right now, if I really look at the map, I think Minnesota is going to be an interesting fight right now because Amy Klobuchar, who just dropped out yesterday, is a Minnesota senator, or is from Minnesota. And that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. The fact that she dropped out just the day before her actual state's going to vote, that's a big thing. And the fact that she also said, Joe Biden, I'm endorsing him. Let's see if her power or her prestige in Minnesota, rather, is going to really kind of push Biden over in Minnesota. It could be a big state. Minnesota is known for having some fairly progressive folks that have come from there, including formerly Al Franken, who was the senator there for more than 10 years. So it's going to be Governor Jesse the Body Ventura, also the former heavy WWF wrestling champion, was Minnesota Politico. So I'm interested to see where Minnesota goes with tonight. I think it's going to be amazing. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, Oklahoma and Texas likely go to Joe Biden, but that might not be necessarily a good thing, as this was also kind of the pattern with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. She won a bunch of the southern states, beating Bernie Sanders there, and then she lost to Donald Trump in the general election. The South generally votes Republican at this point, so there's going to be a lot that's going to have to happen for to see where we're going to go for this. I'm really excited though. It's going to be a fantastic election cycle right now.
Right. There you have the updated polls for Super Fat Tuesday.
Super Fat Tuesday.
Super Tuesday.
Super Fat Tuesday. Fat Tuesday was last week.
Right,
Super
right.
Tuesday is this week.
Sorry about that.
Although
Yeah,
I think
Super Tuesday.
after some of the voting that we have tomorrow, we should probably all go to get crosses
Fat
on our forehead.
Tuesday. Oh.
Maybe a little Lent.
Yeah. Ash Wednesday. Anything else you may want to conclude?
I think we're doing pretty well. What about yourself?
I think I'm okay. So we'll be coming back to you guys after this commercial break. I didn't want to cut it short, but I didn't know, how if I could do 15 minutes for. Oh, we're not about 40. My guy.
Welcome back to BeOnAir. My name is Annette, and I am here with Mr. Dusenberry.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Dusenberry. So, our segment that we're going to be talking about today is going to be Pete Buttigieg and Amy dropping out of the race over the weekend.
Yeah, crazy stuff, right?
Yeah, crazy. So, these two, collectively, they didn't really have many delegates.
No, in fact, they had. I'm just going to pull this up. Amy had 7, and Pete had 26.
26.
So they had 33 total.
33 total. So how is this going to impact the rest of the race?
So we had talked a little bit about this in the first segment, right? Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar were moderates. In fact, at one time, Pete Buttigieg was a Republican. And as a result of this, they're both endorsing Joe Biden. Joe Biden is the moderate Democrat who has been kind of a stalwart Washington, D.C. person, somebody that the current president would have called one of the swamp creatures that he once knew. Of course, we know that he was, best buds with former President Barack Obama. So that people are starting to really, the push here right now is that the fear is that a socialist Democrat, or Democratic socialist, I apologize, a far-leaning left progressive liberal like Bernie Sanders, who has been kind of the leader of most of the voting at this point, is really going to, he can't win. So what's happened is, at least I believe, there are a lot of people that have gotten together behind closed doors and they said, hey, listen, we need to back a candidate. And part of the reason that's happened is, we know that behind closed doors, not a lot of Republicans really like Donald J. Trump. And part of the reason why that he got the election is back in 2016, there were 3 kind of moderate Republicans that were running, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and John Kasich. And each of them were getting enough of the vote to be able to have delegates. But the problem was they weren't beating the frontrunner at the time. And because not one or two of them decided to drop out and support the other, what ended up happening is you got kind of a more hard right Republican like Donald J. Trump to be the president of the United States. So the Democrats are kind of learning from that process. They want their candidate. They want a Joe Biden, maybe a Pete Buttigieg. There were issues with Pete being, unfortunately, in our society, this is still an issue. He was openly gay. He has a husband. There was issues with certain sections of the Democratic voters who basically were saying we're not going to vote for him because of that. And then there were also issues with Amy Klobuchar, some of her records, some of the things that she's done in the past. So they were the 2 likely candidates to kind of step down and then kind of push Biden. And it looks like they're trying to do that effectively. And we're seeing that he's winning in those southern states right now.
And, well, my biggest question to you would be, do you think, you mentioned that Buttigieg and Barack Obama had a relationship.
Oh, Biden.
Biden. And do you think that relationship affects and has an effect on the polls?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, being former vice president of the United States has a huge effect on the polls. We've seen past vice presidents win pretty clearly. We've also seen past vice presidents do well. In fact, in 2000, we saw Al Gore and then President George W. Bush actually had to go to the Supreme Court to make that decision about who was going to be president of the United States. That's how close it was. It was down to less than 500 votes in the state of Florida, the hanging chads. And then George H.W. Bush ended up winning in 1988. He ended up winning after he was the vice president to Ronald Reagan. So these are certainly things that, being a vice president is something that can affect your candidacy. There were a lot of people out there that did like President Barack Obama. He had a very high approval rating in his second term for a very long time. He won the majority in 2012. That's a huge thing. And if he comes out afterwards and he says Joe's my guy, then Joe's going to have a lot of steam, and it's going to help him out with those centrists and those independents that they're really going to start pushing for in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And there's a reason, they've said it before, as goes Ohio, so goes the nation, which we'll be talking about that in probably the next couple of weeks too, is when the Ohio primary starts to creep up on us.
Okay, very interesting. Now with Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Biden, it seems as if they all had similar views when it came down
Sure,
to
yeah,
healthcare.
Yes.
This in particular affects a lot of Americans, and I want to know what your point of view on that, with the similarities in how it will pan out if Biden was to win.
Well, a couple of things, actually. In fact, speaking of Joe Biden, we can now officially call that Joe Biden has won Alabama. So that's a big thing. So that, again, another one of those southern states that we were talking about. Joe Biden wins Alabama, which is interesting because we saw in the last election there was a big referendum, and there's actually a Democratic senator now in Alabama. So that state could be turning a little purple right now, and we could see some real change. I don't think it's going to go to a Democrat this year, but it is possible. To answer your question though, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, a lot of they have a lot of similar things. And as far as Medicare goes, the real question that we have to ask ourselves as a country is, what do we support? Do we support Medicare for all, or do we support a system where you have health care based on a job that you have? For a lot of people, the idea is that they just don't want the socialized medicine. They're fearful of having a big bureaucracy involved in their medical treatment, right? But there's also in America, we know that people want to help, right? How many times do you see somebody say, "I've got cancer, I really can't afford it," and you see groups of Americans donate freely of their own money to help take care of them, right? So we have this thing in America where we want to be able to donate money to a cause, but we don't necessarily want to have that recurring cost happen. So the question you have to ask yourself is it going to make America better if we, excuse me, if we have Medicare for all? My opinion is this: it's a lower cost method to something that we're already doing. We need to be able to have these things. For example, in the state of Colorado, they finally passed legislation, which is intelligent legislation, that said that your diabetes medication, which is rampant in the United States right now, can't be more than $100 a month. That's a huge thing, right? Diabetics should be able to get their medication. I had a young lady that was a good friend of mine recently who passed away because at the beginning of the year, her insurance was taken away from her and she was on dialysis. A couple of months later, she's dead. Yeah. Right? Because you have to be able to have dialysis to stay alive. So the question is, do we want to continue to have a system where even the youngest or the frailest or the weakest amongst us is not able to have affordable health care? And for me, I think a single payer system really is kind of the solution to that.
Perfect. I agree with you as well. And also, one more question that I really wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Buttigieg was quoted saying that Trump could bring back dignity to the White House. What's your take on that statement?
That Trump could bring it back?
Not Trump. I'm so sorry. Trump is the president. He brought no dignity to the White House, so that's an understatement. But Biden. What's your take on that statement?
Well, I think it's twofold, right? So the first statement is obviously something you shared yourself. Buttigieg believes that right now there's no dignity in the White House with Donald J. Trump, and at the same time he wants to kind of prop his friend up now, and that's Joe Biden, the former vice president. He wants to make sure that he's propping him up. So he's trying to create that kind of diverse thought between the two, where Biden himself is a person who would bring back dignity, but at the same time kind of smacking Donald J. Trump, saying you're not a very dignified president. That's an important kind of distinction between the two. So Buttigieg is going to be formidable, and I think he has an excellent chance of being somewhere in the cabinet that Joe Biden creates. I mean, he would be maybe Secretary of State, something like that. We certainly are looking at, that's one of the things that we need to be looking at right now, is that some of these people might be dropping out because they're going to go for a cabinet position.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think that maybe this was a transition into getting into a cabinet position?
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I think Amy Klobuchar and I think Pete Buttigieg just put themselves on a short list to be on his cabinet, and I think that's part of those backdoor deals that we talk about that happen in Washington. I want to to be this. I want to be the Secretary of the Interior. I want to be Secretary of the Homeland. I want to be Secretary of Education. Those are things that they're definitely doing right now, and they're definitely saying, this is what I want to do, and this is why I'm going to endorse you, because I'm going to endorse you because I give you something, you give me back something.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So tit for tat, right? Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's where you're seeing right now. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next, 8 months, because we're actually, as of right now, we're 8 months from Election Day. So 8 months from today, we are going to have we're going to find out whether or not Donald J. Trump stays president of the United States, or we're going to see if whoever the Democrats end up choosing stays becomes the new president of the United States. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
I agree. And right now, it's a very, very tight race, and we have. Well, what I really wanted to ask you is when Buttigieg, when he entered the election, do you think that he really thought that he could stand a chance?
I think so. I think
Okay.
so. And if nothing else, he wanted to be able to put himself out there nationally, right? At this point in time, his experiences as mayor of South Bend, Indiana, but he's been a very powerful voice in Indiana. He's also been a very powerful voice in national politics. It's interesting because he is openly gay. He has hugged at the very least hugged his husband on stage. That's something very different from our society. We haven't seen something like that really on the national level ever. So that's going to be a kind of a big thing, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when, say 10, 15, 20 years from now, maybe his name gets re-entered into the race. We know that Biden originally ran in 1988. He also ran in 2008. So this is not the first time he's ran for president as well. Maybe it's just his term. So I think this was Pete entering the national conversation amongst a lot of people. And at the same time, this was a way for Pete to maybe test and see if it was possible for him. And to be honest, the guy didn't do too bad. 26 delegates is not bad in those first four elections. He just happened to be up against two very, very formidable opponents. And we'll see what happens after this.
Okay. And you've also touched point about Buttigieg being openly gay, and we can kind of say that it's true to the most point that a lot of Americans are a little homophobic.
Sure.
How do you think that will impact the other cabinet members, and do you think that he will be accepted?
Oh, sure. I think what people know about Pete Buttigieg is he can get the job done. His sexuality is not a part of it. So he can get the job done. He did a great job in South Bend, Indiana. He's going to continue to do a great job outside of South Bend, Indiana. And to be frank, I think he would be a fantastic member of the cabinet. We'll see where he gets put. Maybe he becomes Secretary of the Interior. He knows a lot about kind of the heartland, being from Indiana. Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. This is the heartland of the United States, and it may be beneficial. I would love to see him as the Secretary of the Interior.
I would love to see what he does as well. And what about Amy? I haven't really been able to find anything on her.
Amy Klobuchar.
So, what do you think she will bring to our cabinet?
Well, let's see. There's a lot of different ideas. Department of the Homeland Homeland Security would be interesting. She is from Minnesota, so she would also might be a good Secretary of the Interior. She might even make a good Secretary of State. We'll see where she's at. I think if she does get to that point, it'll be interesting to see what Klobuchar does. What I'm excited about is the diversity we saw in a lot of the candidates this year in the Democratic Party.
Definitely. And one last thing. Biden has said that Buttigieg does remind him of his late son, and that was one of the highest compliments. So he speaks very highly of the guy. So I'm interested in the work that they will do together.
Yep.
Other than that, I think that is all the time that we have today. It was very, very nice speaking with you today. Thank you so much for joining me and having a conversation. And we're going to take our commercial break.
Thank you.